Good morning. Good morning. All right, there we go. Welcome to day 2 of the 2025 AGTA American Gem Trade Association's Inspire Seminar Series, sponsored by the AGS, the American Gem Society. Colored stone pricing and market trends. On our stage this hour are Stuart Robertson, president of Gemworld International, and Brecken Branstrator, editor-in-chief of Gemworld International's Gem Guide. Stuart Robertson is an award-winning gemologist and appraiser. He is president of Gemworld and serves as research director of the company's publication, the Gem Guide. Stuart is the immediate past president of the Accredited Gemologists Association. He's also a senior member of the National Association of Jewelry Appraisers and serves as their conference chair. Stuart has extensive experience as an appraiser. He completed the International Society of Appraisers Appraisal Principles core courses in 1993. Today, he focuses his appraisal assignments to special projects as a trial consultant and expert witness work. Stuart is the recipient of the AGA's prestigious Antonio C. Bonanno Award for Excellence in Gemology. He's also the recipient of the AIJV Valuer of the Year Award and the Scottish Gemological Association's McInnes Award. Brecken Branstrator, graduate gemologist, is the editor-in-chief of Gemworld International's Gem Guide publication, the industry leader for gemstone pricing and market information and trends. Brecken has written about gems and jewelry for more than a decade and has dedicated herself to topics like supply and pricing to responsible sourcing. Brecken has traveled extensively across the United States and internationally to attend trade shows and conferences or visit brands and source markets firsthand. Please join me in welcoming Stuart Robertson and Brecken Branstrator.
Good morning. Thank you, Gary. Thanks for the introduction. For many of you, we've done this talk for a number of years now, and we appreciate the invitation to come back and speak some more again about the market trends that we're seeing and where we think the market is going and how the past holiday season looked, to give us a little bit of a look at why we think some of the trends forming are going to carry on into this mid part of this year. We'll just basically cover a quick recap of the season, and then we're going to talk a little bit about our outlook for the trade and a few forecasts. And then Brecken's going to discuss some research she's been working on. We'll conclude with our thoughts on a few challenges that may pop up along the way. So in general, the retail sales rose, it's been reported, rose 4% year over year to a record $994 billion during the holiday season. This is data from the Retail Federation, by the way. 2024 was decent for the jewelry sector. It ended on a positive note. Holiday sales, as we said, were just over 4% up from 2023. Also outperformed the apparel industry, which was a reverse from the prior year. The first 2 months of 2024, this was the interesting thing. When you kind of look at the information, though, the first 2 months of last year, combined with that period from Black Friday through the end of the year, accounted for this growth. A large part of last year was very stagnant as far as sales were concerned. The industry was slow for a lot of the year, but through to basically 3.5 very active months made it very worthwhile. So we thought we should look a little bit into who did well, and independent neighborhood-based mom and pop stores were strong. This, of course, makes sense because independents tend to know their customers. They tend to sell what the customer wants. That's kind of reverse from some of the large corporate chain stores where the buyer will never know anything about the particular community that a product's going to go into. So there's a lot of revenue spent on creating marketing campaigns to convince consumers to buy certain things, and that doesn't always work real well. On the reverse, we also saw support at the high end of the market. Richmond, whose brands include Cartier, among others, had a strong year, 14% growth, basically, for the period ending on December 31st. Really, they had a very banner year in that regard. Online sales, social media-based markets saw nearly 10% increase from the same period in 2023. Best-selling categories in general were, simple gold chain and things like this. Colored stones did very well as also. Natural diamond market was weak, but the market's stabilizing. Factory-grown diamonds continued a deep loss in their price. We do think the colored stone jewelry also saw, it was strong. The season was particularly strong for color, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, why we think that was and why we think that trend is gaining in its strength. For those of you that read the Gem Guide, for years and years, we've basically recognized that colored stones as an entire category, usually accounted for somewhere, but it would vary between 9 and 11% of the industry. That's not the case anymore. We're seeing color, it is, as we mentioned, it is increasing its market share. It's become a major profit center. It's recognized as a major profit center for the industry. I think just all the effort now, the discussion last year and then this year to incorporate colored gemstones. AGTA has been involved in this project with Rappaport to put colored gemstones into the RapNet trading platform is further evidence that color has really gained significant market share now. We'll talk a little bit about where we think things are now. As things stand at the moment, it's a promising year. There are a few caveats that we'll touch on. We again expect color to be really about one of the strongest categories in our industry this year. Number of reasons for that. We did want to touch a little bit though. Production is very limited. We've talked about this for several years now during this talk. Scarcity is supporting the price rise. There was some discussion after the Hong Kong show whether prices had hit a ceiling and whether there'd be some, if we would see prices tend to decrease a little bit. At this point, we don't see any scenario in which prices for the fine end of color will come down. The reality is that scarcity is supporting the market. Demand at the upper end, at the finer quality grades, is stronger. So absent a major economic downturn, we don't see that happening. We do, and this is always a touchy thing, but we think that when you come to a show like this, just from what we've observed, at times retail buyers tend to have the wrong approach when it comes to colored stones. Buyers tend to treat color like it's gold or diamond, something you can just access whenever you want because of the availability. Colored gemstones really haven't been like that for a number of years now, especially in the fine end. Scarcity is such that if you see something you like, it really is necessary to buy it at that point because the opportunity to see a comparable material again is, under the current market that we're in, is very unlikely. And if you do come across comparable material in a relatively short period of time, you can be assured it's going to be more expensive. There just are not, at least as far as I have heard, there have not been any major new sources that have come online for a number of years. We just touched on this. I do think that this is going to be a positive. It's going to further expand market access for colored stones. and certainly by no small measure. The value determinants of color extend beyond the 4 Cs, however, so there's going to be a bit of a learning curve, especially for those market participants that have traditionally worked solely in the diamond industry. But I do think that this is going to be a positive. It'll take some time for it to gain some traction, but a trading platform, I think, will be beneficial. Many of the key trends and buying opportunities that will set the tenor of business for the jewelry trade this year, at least during the first half, will be established at this show. That's why we have a large number of researchers here, as well as our editor-in-chief of the Gem Guy. She's spending the whole week going around interviewing, collecting information, and we have a large research team that's going around and collecting pricing data. At this point, I'm just going to hand this over to Brecken, though, so she can discuss a few of the things that she's seen develop.
Yeah, so before we get a little bit more into what the stones are doing specifically, I wanted to offer a few looks ahead for the year based on what I've been seeing in the market, hearing in the market. Starting with my first prediction is that I think this year is really going to be about green tourmaline. Green is definitely the color that we've been hearing the most about the past year or so. It's still very strong. I expect that'll continue. And I think when you combine that with the good availability of tourmaline, especially compared to its green competitors, we'll say, with a good affordability, I think this is the year for green tourmaline. The color I think might be oncoming is orange. I feel like I've been having a lot of conversations with people watching the design space that there are more designers getting into some orange material. And, fancy sapphires and garnets have been sort of popular stones of late, so I think this could be the year for orange as well. We'll see how that plays out. In terms of cuts, I expect fantasy cuts, one-off cuts, from these independent cutters to keep going. I am hearing a little bit more of, there was this trend towards kites, hexes for a little while, and some people are saying that's bouncing back, but I expect when you talk about how these designers are continuing to set themselves apart, that they'll keep finding their way into this part of the market. And in terms of pricing, we are obviously going to be watching all tiers very closely. I don't think we expect the high end to do much of anything, but this year I think that the commercial goods, the lower end, is really going to soften a lot. We were hearing at the end of last year that the Hong Kong shows were rather quiet with not a lot of Chinese buyers. So I think if you take away that demand with a very high availability, I think this year we're going to see that area soften a bit. And I put this fifth one a little facetiously because obviously I can't predict that, but I know, as Stuart said, we haven't heard any significant finds in the past few years, and supply is really tight right now. So we are hoping to have some good news, especially from a reporting perspective, to share with you guys this year. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And just to get into some of the trends that we're seeing more specifically, as we talk about, excuse me, a low supply and a high demand that continues, we're starting to see buyers enter more areas of goods that they maybe weren't exploring before, much wider buying preferences. So either new materials or new colors and traditional stones that they weren't looking at before. I feel like in the past few months, I've had a few conversations about hazy or opalescent sapphires that they're calling. So they've got a lot of silk and they have this cloudy look to them, and they're marketing them as opalescent. Green, coppery, and tourmaline. There's a lot of talk there too. There's a few designer collections that are happening right now. We know that the traditional blues of Paraíba prices are sky high and supply is not there. So they're sort of finding their way into the green material that still offers the same great neon look, but it's much cheaper, more affordable. And going back to the colors, the continues of the greens and the party sapphires, stuff outside of the traditional blues of sapphire, denim Montana sapphires is really popular right now too.
Then kind of continuing along with the theme of, areas that are active and what we expect, it's not a surprise to anyone that the rare and unusual stones have been strong sellers in Tucson. And again, this relates to, their production of the faceted material in the category has always been very small. Just to throw out a, example from what we saw last year, Coast to Coast and John Bradshaw brought approximately 150 bonitoites to the show. 90% sold the first morning of the first day. So there is a big appetite for rarities, for the unusual material, especially when you get it in the nicer gem quality. There's an appetite for it. Rare gems have been strong the past 5 years in particular, that we've really been paying attention to this trend. Lots of attention on these stones in the collectors, custom jeweler, as well as designer markets. But product knowledge is key with a lot of these because not all are really suitable for jewelry. So there needs to be some, if it's an area that somebody moves into, they need to have some knowledge, take time to have some knowledge about what they can do and not do with stones. Kyanite here and a red beryl as well thrown up. Continuing with the forecast, some of the benchmark stones, this particular photo is a suite of Lightning Ridge black opal. Columbia Gem House is introducing a new program this year at AGTA. A number of the other stones that, just to touch on a little bit of what Brecken was talking about as well. We see garnet, tourmaline, sapphire, of course, spinel, opal, zircon, especially in the earthy colors, and peridot. The higher end of specialty pieces and one-of-a-kind stones are expected to be the focal point of this year's show. They're just that unusual. Dealers report that alexandrite also, I'll just mention that, during our surveys leading up to the show, as well as when the first day walking around, people were noting a unexpectedly high increase in the number of requests for alexandrite. It's very popular now. Prices are strong, however. So, demand is good, but people have to have some realistic expectation about the material. There are a number of stones that people want until they hear the price. There's a kind of a disconnect happening in the structure of our market now where people want that top 3 to 5% highest quality, but they want to pay a price point that's somewhere representative of the average quality in the market. That's not been a scenario that's existed for a very long time in the industry. As mentioned, garnet, multiple colors, both garnet and tourmaline continue to see decent demand in the global market. Not everybody is in agreement with this, but from the majority of people we talk to, these are actually very strong categories now. The palette of colors represented by garnet in particular is quite large. Supply does fluctuate. There is typically some availability in most of these key colors, however. Recent production of rhodolite in Tanzania, of course, was worth mentioning here because several dealers expressed to us that it's a beautiful material, but it seems to be kind of testing the ceiling for price in the category based on what rhodolite is historically sold for, because in the dealer-to-dealer market very recently, this material has all of a sudden hit $180 to almost $200 a carat, which is a strong price point for the material. So we'll see how it works out, but the market has an appetite. We'll see where prices settle. Supply and demand always figure out eventually, ultimately what price will level at. Here's a chart that we threw together just kind of mapping the price increases that we've seen over time. And as you can see, and certainly would not be surprised by, it's the extra fine and fine categories that have seen the big increases over the period that we've been plotting it. Benefit from classic name recognition, of course, as well as the high price of other stones in the same color range. We see a lot of what we consider, it's not necessarily fair to say it's a color substitution, but as prices of other things like ruby and spinel and things go higher and higher, then some of the stones that have similar color, such as garnet, also see increased demand and their price move up. Prices here, by the way, are for the 1 carat size. Unlike spinel or ruby, as the size of rhodolite increases, the per carat price increases, but not substantially. Tourmaline, another strong area. Tourmaline is also proven to be a winner this year from what we're hearing already from the first few days of the show. Paraiba and Dicolite, the teal colors, all said to be very good sellers. Red and pink have always been active. Green tourmaline is benefiting from the current popularity of green in general. We've seen that last year. Emerald and a number of other stones, green was a positive. It's a popular color. We've noted a dip in price for some of the Mozambican Paraiba type, or Cuprian as we refer to it in the gem guide, but mostly in those lower to middle grades, and it was simply, as one dealer explained, the amount of that particular range of material that was shown last year in Vegas and then again in Hong Kong was so high that it undermined the perception that the material was rare, and so that's what hurt it. But at the high end of the price, high-end qualities, we've seen prices only stabilize and in some cases move even a little bit higher. And obviously, if we're going to mention the Paraiba type material, we should mention the actual Paraiba material from Brazil. Prices there have been holding very strong, and not surprisingly, we've seen very high prices even in the small 1 carat size. We've seen stones that have had wholesale asking prices of over $70,000 a carat in the 1 carat Paraiba Windex Blues. We're only seeing what the asking is. Who knows what the actual negotiated price would be, but no, the numbers have gotten very high in that category. Same issue here. This is data in this particular chart is for the 1 to 199 carat sizes. Prices, of course, would increase per carat dramatically for larger stones in this category. And as you can see, it's the fine and the extra fine that have gone way up, over the period that we're plotting here. We threw out a couple of outliers because they just seem so high compared to what the other data was, but there are asking prices that are substantial in this category. Sapphire, a strong seller in the global trade. Like ruby and emerald, sapphire sales are mostly single stone sizes now. We actually had a couple of people mention this point. One is overseeing the buyers for a large manufacturing, supply, and wholesale colored stone and diamond company. Reality is the cost of producing Meli has risen so sharply on increased cutting costs, etc., that it's really kind of tempered demand for the smalls. So the focus now is really on the single stone sizes. For true pod Paracha sapphire, prices are firm, availability very tight for sizes above a carat. And again, as one of the dealers we spoke to at the beginning of the week noted, that pod Paracha is the stone that everybody wants until they hear the price. And then they realize they want it, but they can't afford it. It's gotten very high, but it deserves to be. And when we talk about pod Paracha, we mean what historically has been accepted as pod Paracha, not some of these other stones that are kind of brown and other, colors, not stones that are shifting, and if you take them out and look at it in other light, they actually have green zones running through them. There's a lot of stuff getting called pod that doesn't come remotely close to the classic definition. As for one of last year's darlings at the show, Montana Sapphire, demand is good again this year, but the interest now is strongest in the kind of local markets for the material. This is a trend that's being observed in most of the American gems, and we'll touch on it again in a moment. Just a note on this slide, it's an 801 blue sapphire, a 2 carat purple sapphire, and a 602 pod. All these were from Carl Larson at Pala. And this again is a chart, just average pricing wholesale per carat, 2 carat Ceylon sapphire, no heat. And again, not surprisingly, it's the top grades that have moved. Dealers we talked to also indicate that, the appetite for spinel has really at this point become unstoppable. Very popular material. Prices reflected too. Benefited from high price of ruby. Not a big supply, so demand has pushed prices up. Prices here again for a 1 carat chart. The history is significantly higher as you get into larger stones. You look at a price history like this again, and the prices are much higher. Alexandrite, which we mentioned just a minute ago, prices for all the traditional range of colors. We're talking about traditional range of colors though here, the green, bluish green, red, purplish. Prices for those kind of brown changing to a much uglier brown, and the yellow to browns and stuff that the labs are, you're seeing a lot of lab reports on lately. That's not the pricing on this chart. That's actually not the pricing on any chart we do. Prices for larger, finer stones in the classic colors, obviously per carat wise exceed this. And again, this was a stone that we got a photo from Carl Larson. Interestingly, he's got a matched pair of 5+ carat Alexandrites at their booth.
That's not Russian, Alex. Like that's like on 1 carat size. That's what you're putting on.
Yeah, no, the Alex, yeah, no, we no.
What was the question? Repeat the question.
The prices for Alex have gotten much higher. That's the point, correct? Yeah.
But you, the chart you put up, you don't include Russia in the research.
That's Brazil.
Right, that's Brazil.
Yeah.
That's for Brazilian material, not Russian.
Yeah, no, not Russian.
Yeah.
Russia, yeah.
You didn't know that, and I just wanted to.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, it's Brazilian. Most of the Alexandrite that you're going to see in the market is not from Russia. Most of it is either Brazilian or deposits in Africa, and there's Ceylon material, but not much at all that we see that's truly provenance is Russian. Peridot, another area that we think is going to be popular because it has been the last couple of years within the range that it sells. 3 carat average prices, again, per carat wholesale. You see, again, not a surprise, it's the fine and extra fine that have moved up. Zircon, an area that a number of people have been very pleased with the last year or two. It's really picking up. Blues have always been strong, but now some of these other colors that were popular a decade ago are starting to be increased activity again in the marketplace. It's popular among independent jewelers and particularly the small kind of gallery-based designers that often you see also advertising on social media and stuff. We're seeing a lot of zircon consumed in that market. These stones, by the way, are all from Mayer and Watt. And this was a price chart we did on the blues. Blues have touched, again, we had an outlier we threw out, one dealer with stones at $800 a carat wholesale. We've seen those numbers in large stones before, but not 2 or 3 carat stones. So, it's an asking price. We're not convinced is going to have a lot of activity at this point. That's why, we threw it out. Zircon's not immune to the price increases experienced by many other gem varieties the last couple of years. It has moved up and pretty dramatically relative to where it historically had been. We mentioned Montana before. Just a quick note on the American gemstones as a category. Very active past few years with Montana and San Diego County tourmalines being particularly newsworthy. But dealers report that this is a market, again, as I mentioned, that's now kind of reverted back to local market driven. And it's not that the material is not as popular. It's simply that the supply is it's basically the supply has become again a little bit less production, a number of other issues that are basically have made it again too limited to support a broader market, I guess is the way to put it. The one exception is the Arizona Peridot. That is produced and marketed in quantities sufficiently enough. Barker's been very successful with that over the years. That is a stone that sells by its origin as in the global marketplace. Then I'll pass it back to Brecken to talk about a few trends.
Thanks. So we're going to take a step back and look at overall jewelry trends for you guys for what I'm seeing lately, starting with a lot of stars and hearts. There's sort of this, astrology theme that's still really prevalent right now. Animal nature motifs, that continues a lot. We've seen a lot of that last year in Vegas. This stone one I think is interesting is the hard stones or the opaque stones, both large stones and rings, large center stones, and really interesting trends of inlay patterns, mosaic patterns using hard stones as well for accents. Bold gold I think continues on even despite the price of gold. I guess we'll see if that happens this year, as predictions are that it could jump up above $3,000 per ounce, so we'll keep an eye on that. Bezel settings, I've been seeing a lot of these lately. I think this is sort of a step back into clean lines and a cleaner look for trends. So we're seeing a lot of bezel set necklaces and rings especially. And luckily for us, big color is very in right now. Cocktail rings are back, and big statement rings, especially in really unique color combinations. We're hearing a lot of that right now. And moving on, we thought we'd offer a little bit of a newsier look at what's going on right now in some of those source countries for potentially things that could shape the year. Starting with Mozambique, they've had a significant amount of civil unrest within the past few years, and in the past few months, Gemfields had released some statements that their mining site had been overrun and sort of disrupted. I don't think too much of the mining has been disrupted yet, but as we all know, it's this significant source for ruby right now. We'll be keeping an eye on what that might do for supply there. Ethiopia as well, they had a civil war that ended a few years ago, but even as late last year, I was hearing from some of the miners and the dealers that mining was very interrupted. Some of the miners couldn't get to their sites. Trade activity was very stunted. There wasn't much moving out of there. So we'll watch that this year as well. Kenya, interestingly, last year their government announced a plan for strategic minerals, and Savarite was included in that. And unclear what exactly that means still. One of our East African correspondents said that they thought it would be something like the government having 10% stake in mining claims, but even to them, it's still very unclear. He said they're very frustrated because they can't export much Savarite right now. There isn't much moving. No clear guidelines yet what that's going to mean for them, as well as the government potentially allowing mining in Tsavo National Park. Nothing has happened of yet. They had a Savarite summit in Kenya and Voi last year, and they are still talking about that. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. In Zambia, perhaps you all heard this very recently, it started a 15% export duty on their precious gemstones on top of a 6% mineral royalty tax that already existed. So this is all news from Gemfields as well, which means a total tax of 21% on their revenues. Now, for comparison, Brazil's aggregate revenue tax is 2%, and Colombia's is 2.5%. So that's where Zambia lies within those three sources. So, and Gemfields had also just announced a 6-month suspension of their mining operations at Kagem in Zambia to cut costs. So now they've got this export duty on it, so we'll see what happens there. And then I think one of the other things of note is Afghanistan. The Taliban indicated they were going to focus on minerals to help buoy their economy last year. I spoke with JVC this week just to make sure I had all the details right on this one, and they were saying that in 2022, the government had issued a license allowing for economic activity with Afghanistan, in Afghanistan, as long as it wasn't linked to the Taliban or anyone on the sanctions list. So if it was someone not connected to the Taliban and not sanctioned to sell the gems, then it's theoretically possible, although not likely, that someone could trade legally. And I also got a report from a gemstone friend who's very familiar with the situation as of this week that Gemrough is still flowing out of Afghanistan, largely through Pakistan. So we're going to keep an eye on that as well. And now I want to talk briefly about a research project that we took on last year, which was to look into how fracture filling in gemstones was affecting, what the market makeup was, what we were seeing today in terms of preferences, what kind of material was on the market, and if those fillers were affecting price. And the first thing I was looking at was the market share of filler types in terms of what was out there versus oils or resins. And unfortunately, I found that was very difficult to find, the market share, very difficult to know because you have this constant removal and refilling between different kinds of oils or oil to resin and that kind of thing. So it's really hard to tell what is what. And the labs also said that they were finding that most often the people that were sending in their lab reports to get a filler ID, it was because it was oiled and they wanted certification to say so. So obviously that's what they would see most often, likely. I also was looking into market share in terms of degrees of enhancement. So no oil, unenhanced, minor, moderate, that kind of thing. And this was really hard as well because of partial removal and because the labs all have slightly different ways that they assign their degree of enhancement. But the obvious, and I think to all of us, is that the rarest and most desired is unenhanced. But there's very little of that material on the market now, so not everyone can have that. But I went to the labs and asked them what they were seeing, and most of them said minor or better, or somewhere along minor or moderate, with the caveat again that a lot of these stones are going in for reports because they are likely finer quality. But I was trying to canvass material across platforms and at wholesalers, and I found that even then I was seeing most often minor and moderate. And anecdotally, when I was talking to some of the wholesalers, I think it's worth noting that all material is seen with all types of fillers. You can find pretty much anything. But there were definitely preferences for some of them when it came to who was buying what. And Asia, especially mainland China, still wants unenhanced. That's their number one. But someone did note that he was seeing an increasing acceptance for the buyers there of resin type, which I thought was very interesting. US and Middle East both are a little bit more open to resin. And then in Europe, it sort of depended. Overall, maybe a little stricter with wanting oil types, but sort of depended on country. One wholesaler who dealt primarily in resin goods said he can't sell a single stone in France, he feels like, because they just really are looking for oil. Meanwhile, Italy is a much better market for him. And then when it comes to pricing, the first thing I was looking at was the degree of enhancement compared to wholesale price. And I think this is probably pretty apparent, but there's obviously a strong relationship between the degree of enhancement and the overall wholesale asking price. Since, obviously if you have an insignificant or minor, it's a pretty high quality anyway, so it's going to be a good indicator of quality. So how they compare. Unenhanced, obviously the highest premium. The exact premium really depends on the origin and size, of course, but with no oil, the premium is largest with Colombian emeralds by far. Then you move on to insignificant and minor. Pretty much everybody said there's a pretty small gap in wholesale price between these two. They're both still considered fine quality stones generally. And then prices really drop off as you get to moderate and below. So we had everything from a 10 to 50% difference between some of them from minor to moderate, depending on the quality and size of the stone, to 40% lower after you get to significant and lower. So those are just some interesting numbers they noted. And here's an example of 4 listings from one of the marketplaces, just a screenshot. Relatively same size stones, similar qualities, with varying degrees of enhancement. And insignificant is not on here, but again, there's a small gap between it and minor. So here we see, sorry, it's kind of blurry, but I think that's 36,000 per carat for none, and at 3,600, something like that, for significant. So pretty big difference.
What percentage were coming out of none?
Sorry?
What percentage of the stones were coming out of none? Like, I know you said you didn't want to get into, like, what percentage were coming out, one or two, with resin or not, because it's refilling and whatnot. But
Yeah.
none is not.
Like less than 1%. Somebody was saying like 0.01%. Yeah.
Sorry, 0.
Oh, certs.
The certs that we're getting.
I don't know. Yeah.
You don't have
No, no, sorry.
If I talk to you later, will you have it?
Well, you can ask me later. And then, getting to the crux of really what I was looking at was whether filler type affected the wholesale price. And this was impossible to nail down because it really depends on the quality category. So generally, again, obviously each price varies for each stone on the size, the filler, the origin. But I was finding that the final wholesale price did depend on quality category. So lower quality stones, less of a difference depending on filler type. Lower quality is lower quality. It's probably going to, have similar prices. And then as the quality increased, stones with oil tended to carry a premium. According to the wholesalers, they could ask for more if they had a stone with oil. But that's also because in the higher categories, oil is pretty much what they ask for. It's seen as less aggressive. One of the wholesalers said it's seen as hiding less. So that's really where they're seeing themselves. And this quote, I'll let you guys read it, but this is from a wholesaler when I asked him, well, which is it? Does filler type affect price, or is it sort of just that the price is already set for quality and filler is just there? And that's what he gave me, which I think explains it pretty well. And this is just one more anecdotal example. I give you this because when I was looking for whether or not when we took on this research project, we were kind of wondering whether we would be able to say with percentages the difference between oil types and resin types. But we found that it was impossible to do without identification of some of them, and it was just really hard to compare. So this is one Colombian dealer. He gave me these as ideas of how the prices could vary depending on filler type. And then where we're moving on, so that article was in the November-December issue. For any of you who are subscribers, you might have seen it. And now we are looking into fracture filling of non-emerald gems. AGL has noted it for years that they're seeing filler in gems beyond emeralds. Lotus Gemology, of course, within the past few years especially, has issued many trade alerts trying to alert the trade to be on the lookout for fillers that are in stones beyond emerald. So we're going to be looking at, I've heard so far things like corundum, tourmaline, beryl, spinel, and I think the big one is cuprian tourmaline in terms of what we're going to be looking at, just because as Stuart mentioned, prices are sky high there. So we're going to see if there's any effect on pricing there. So keep an eye on that in the next issue. Pass it back over to Stuart now.
All right, thanks, Brecken. So as we mentioned, a few times at this point, we've already alluded to that, supply is pretty tight now, and prices have shot up as a result. If you see something that you like, it's always a good idea to buy it, especially in the colored stone side of our industry. The reserve of material is very low, and dealers, they've become increasingly aware of the fact that if they sell something, they need to replace it, restock it in the current marketplace, and that means higher prices. So they're keenly aware of it, and so even on older stock, prices have moved up. You still can find pieces that are priced a little bit more, advantageously for the buyer if it's old stock, but that's not a common situation now. The market price is what the market price is now. High cost of gold is another thing that we look at. It's encouraging more use of alternative metals and materials in jewelry. When we talk about some of the issues that we see coming out of governmental efforts to increase economic benefit of mineral resources, this is also driving up prices. By the way, this should not, be confused with the type of value retention being sought for earlier stages in the supply chain through, efforts in responsible sourcing or transparency in the supply chain. This is more governmental taxing and imposing basically additional fees on some of the mining areas that are going on. It doesn't pass down to the workers. It stays often within the control of just the government officials, quite frankly, in my opinion. Tariffs, another thing that we've been hearing a lot of lately. Don't know really to what extent any of this is going to affect the industry at this point. It really is an unknown. We'll see what happens, but there's been a big change in how things basically function in Washington lately. So let's see. All we can do is watch and see. Consumer rotation to more experience-based expenditures was a category that actually had increased during the holiday season. It is something that we continue to consider because discretionary spending is discretionary spending, and if it starts to rotate in larger numbers into other areas of the consumers' areas of interest in the market, then yeah, we'll see maybe a little bit of dip. We'll see what happens. Now, this slide was here last year, and I put it back in because we'll talk about it for just a second, but the reality was this proved to be one of the more popular slides of the talk. We had a number of people contact us afterwards and ask us for more information about lab-grown diamonds, if you want to use that term, in the synthetic diamond market. We were actually surprised. So I mentioned to Brecken, I said, this is really a colored stone talk, but should we do an update on what's happening in the synthetic diamond price points? And Brecken's like, well, we have the data. I mean, I can take care of it for you. And I said, okay, well, and this is what the trend from the last 12 months looks like. And with that, I threw you under the bus. Now, I did want to mention, just as we wrap up here, there were a couple of things that are kind of food for thought that Brecken and I thought were at least worth thinking about for people. They're not things that we have the answer to, but there is this discussion with the lab-grown diamonds. Now, you notice in the beginning I used factory-grown, which is the term that we used last year, and it's the term that we think is most appropriate. But we also don't think it's appropriate to really get hung up on the labeling, because there was another issue with this product from our standpoint, and then not that it's a negative. People always assume that we think it's a bad product. No, I'm for free markets. Anything that consumers want to buy is fine with me as long as they've been given all the appropriate information. But we do have a little bit of concern that the major laboratories started to grade these stones, synthetic diamonds, with the same terminology that was used, or very similar terminology that was used for natural diamonds. Seems appropriate, right? Except what didn't happen, in my opinion, was that area of the natural diamond that relates to rarity was never discussed with the consumer or even retail jewelers, that had absolutely no relevance whatsoever to synthetic diamonds. So the idea of a DVS1 in a natural stone has a price because it is much rarer than a K color I1. But none of that was ever transferred to the marketplace. And that, I think, was a probably unintentional deception that has created a lot of the disruption that we see now. Will we see similar disruption in the colored stone industry as synthetic colored stones become more popular again? I'm not so sure, because we have a 100+ year history of dealing with the nomenclature and the colored stone side of this business. And lab-grown, synthetic, created, whatever term you want to use for colored stones, that market share, they are increasing. But it sells to a specific price point focused consumer for what it is. There wasn't really the confusion of what it should be. The other thing that Brecken and I were chatting about last night, and I'd spoken with Cheatham a few times over the last year. We stood up here and we talked again this year about there not really being much in the way of any significant new production that we're aware of. And it makes you start to connect the dots and just wonder, as an industry, what implications for the laboratory community does that present? If you think about it, in the last couple of years, we've heard about large layoffs in some of the major diamond grading labs, and now we're seeing a lot of the seasoned talent from those labs leaving. So I don't know what the cause is, don't know if their market share is shrinking, but I do think that if there is significant drop in new production, then maybe it makes sense that at some point it would catch up to the business of the labs. Cheatham and I were having a conversation. It's not fair to say who it was with, long as it was a private conversation, but he works in one of the major labs, and he brought up the same point on Tuesday evening. So I think that it's something, again, we don't have the answer, but we think as an industry we should be just wondering, giving at least some thought for what the future may look like and what the role of some of these entities will be and what impact they'll face if the population of material continues to be more supported by recycling of material back from estates and stuff as opposed to new production. And with that, we just want to thank everybody for their attention this morning, and I guess we have maybe a couple of minutes before Dick needs to come up and get set up. So if there's a question or two, Brecken is here to answer them.
Questions? Questions? Oh, now the hands go up. Go ahead.
Have you guys been following the pricing on the cobalt spin-off in Kansas?
It's one of the areas that that our researchers are looking at this year at the shows. The question was if we were looking at the pricing of cobalt spinel from Tanzania. We had a number of categories that we put out to our research team this year, and collecting on cobalt is one of them. We saw a stone last year in Las Vegas that had a 150,000 plus price point, I think, per carat on the stone, which was an incredible price, but the stone looked like no other cobalt spinel you've ever seen. And if you want to see it, I'll tell you who has it because it's downstairs. So, but yeah, no. And by the way, I've mentioned researchers a few times. I should give you a quick little insight into what that is. We're not just doing interviews with people. Our research team are a combination of appraisers and also retail jewelers and a few other dealers that walk the shows and collect information on our behalf, but under their own businesses, their buying needs. So we give assignments of particular areas that we're looking at, but I think you can understand why we would do it, because if we walk around and just say, here's our gem guide, what do you think of the price? It's probably not the most appropriate way to actually collect market data, because they're in the marketplace buying anyways. We're getting a better sense of what they're being expected to pay for certain pieces. So that's how we do the research. If there's any other questions, happy to answer them.
Yes.
I should know the answer. Local market driven? What are you talking about? People in Arizona buying Arizona stones?
Yeah, the strongest markets for Maine tourmaline now are Maine, for the San Diego County tourmaline, or California, things like that. And it's only because, as we said, the supply is tightened up. There's legal issues in San Diego. There's not a lot of production. It hasn't been for a long time in Maine. So it's just not enough to support a stronger commercial market. So it's a really tight niche.
Over here. Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, it's about mining for both ruby from Afghanistan and Tajikistan.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Mining of Alex, because I'm only seeing people asking for Indian material the same prices they were asking for Brazilian material a couple of years ago, and there's no Brazilian.
What's the question?
Is there any mining going on the Alex side that you're seeing? Are they making any mines, or is it all it's a couple of bits of gravel?
Yeah, no, we're not aware that there's any significant new pockets of development in Brazil or anything as related to the Alex or anywhere else. There's always little trickles of things that come out, but it's not the same thing as a commercial production. So,
What was
if we were aware of any, more commercial mining of alexandrite or some of the other things.
Yes, right here. Go ahead.
Okay, so, there seems to be a lot more red spinel on the market this year, what I've seen. And is the red spinel gonna change the price of the rubies, the way the lab-grown diamonds have changed the price of the diamonds?
No, I think,
Themselves have gone down because of the lab, right? Because of the lab stones.
So more red spinels in the market are going to
This year,
change
it
ruby
looks like-
prices?
it's,
Well, the red spinel, you look at it, it is just so much bling, and it's so, it's better than a ruby. But the rubies keep going up so high in price. Will people end up focusing more on red spinel, and will that bring down the price of rubies?
yeah, your question is a good one in that regard, and it's actually, we've seen these types of scenarios develop over decades now, collecting information, and I think it's actually going to be the reverse. The price of ruby will stay up here. The price of spinel will move up the rung of the ladder on a color substitution basis, and right behind it, red tourmaline, pink tourmaline, garnet, because there's distinctly different products. So the colors themselves will respond, each one being pulled up a little bit more the rung of the ladder as the one on top finds support at price level. So ruby prices won't go down based on that. Ruby prices will probably, continue to be very high, and spinel will actually get pulled up by the vacuum.
Any more questions back here? Yes, go ahead. What's the question?
Saltwater pearls. Pearls are, that's a tricky one for us, and it's another area we're looking at, because we've heard that, as you know, the last few years, the harvests were all disrupted during COVID. We're not aware that there's been any real increased, harvest yet. Actually, one of our sources that was basically doing or buying before the show. She travels to the farms and has for years because of her relatives being in that part of the industry. Came back and said that the production of material was not as nice as was expected, and much smaller. So in pearls in general, whether it's South Seas down to Akoya, we're finding the prices are higher than we expected them to be at this point, because we thought there would have been an improved environment after, because now we're several years after COVID, but we're not seeing it yet.
Okay, we have run out of time. If you have any more questions for Stuart or Brecken, they should be at the booth out in the promenade on the left-hand side as you walk out. Go straight. Round of applause.